Don't do it. But the rancher did it anyway, and the whole town lost its mind. The town of Cedar Creek was small, quiet, and the kind of place where everyone knew each other's name. Its streets were lined with old wooden fences, and the scent of hay and fresh earth lingered in the air almost all year round. Life moved slowly here, in a way that made people feel safe and familiar. Everyone had a routine, and nothing ever happened without the whole town noticing. But even in such a peaceful place, there were always stories whispered from porch to porch, and the one that had everyone talking now involved Thomas Hayes, the town's most respected rancher. Thomas was known for his calm demeanor and hard work. He had inherited the ranch from his father, who had built it from scratch, and he treated every cow, every field, and every corner of that land as if it were a living, breathing thing. People admired him for it. His hands were always rough, his face tanned from long hours under the sun, and there was a quiet strength about him that made neighbors trust his judgment. Thomas had a way of doing things that made you believe he could handle anything. But sometimes, even the strongest of men made choices that worried the people around them. It started on a Tuesday morning when Thomas appeared at the local supply store in his old pickup truck. Dust clung to the tires and windows, evidence of the long drive from the ranch. The townspeople noticed the truck because it was unusual for him to come into town without a specific purpose. He carried a few large sacks of feed and some equipment parts, but it wasn't the items themselves that caused a stir. It was the look on his face. Thomas's brow was furrowed, his eyes restless, and there was a tension in the way he moved that the locals could sense from across the store. "I heard Thomas is up to something," whispered Mrs. Clark, the elderly woman who ran the corner store, "and I don't like it." "Not one bit." Her words spread like wildfire. Soon, people were murmuring in the streets, in the cafe, and on porches. The word risky kept coming up, though nobody was entirely sure what Thomas was planning. Some said it had to do with the northern pasture, a section of the land that had been avoided for years. Old tales told of accidents there, livestock falling into hidden gullies, equipment tipping over, and even a storm that had once damaged a barn beyond repair. For years, the northern fields were a place of caution. That made Thomas's recent activities even more concerning to the town. Neighbors tried to talk to him about it, their voices filled with concern. "Thomas, you really shouldn't go near that part of the land," said George Miller, a rancher whose family had lived in Cedar Creek for generations. "It's not safe. You know what happened last time someone tried anything there." Thomas listened quietly. He didn't raise his voice and he didn't seem annoyed, but he also didn't promise to stop. He only nodded politely and said, "I appreciate your concern. I'll be careful." And with that, he returned to his truck, leaving the neighbors staring after him, uneasy. By the next morning, rumors had grown. Some said he was planning to move his entire herd into the forbidden pasture. Others claimed he was going to try something no one had ever done before, a maneuver that would either bring him great success or total disaster. Children passing by the ranch would pause and watch as Thomas worked, curious about what exactly he was doing. There were whispers of daring and recklessness, mixed with awe. People couldn't decide whether to admire him or fear him. Thomas, however, felt none of the doubt that filled the town. He rose with the sun every day, walking the fields and inspecting fences, gates, and the cattle. To him, the northern pasture wasn't dangerous. It was a challenge. He saw opportunity where others saw risk. He believed in preparation, careful planning, and knowing your land better than anyone else. And though the townspeople had warned him, he felt certain he could succeed where others feared to tread. Still, his actions were drawing attention. From the cafe to the local feed store, people speculated about what he might do next. Some older residents shook their heads, saying, "I've seen Thomas take risks before, but this one feels different. I don't like it." Younger folks, however, were more intrigued. They admired the courage it took to go against caution, to test limits, and to do something bold when everyone else would stay safe. Even at home, Thomas's family felt the tension. His wife, Margaret, gently tried to persuade him. "Maybe you should wait," she suggested one evening, her hands wringing slightly as she spoke. "The land has always been tricky, and well, maybe it's better not to push it." Thomas smiled at her, placing a hand over hers. "I understand, Margaret, I really do. But I've thought this through. I know the land, I know my cattle, I can handle this." And that was all he said. There was no argument, no raised voices, only quiet determination. Margaret could see it in his eyes. She knew she couldn't stop him, but she worried anyway, as did every neighbor who knew what was coming. The days passed, and Thomas continued preparing. He moved equipment into place, inspected fences, and studied the northern pasture with a meticulous eye. He worked alone most of the time, but occasionally a trusted helper would come by to assist, someone who shared his confidence, or at least his willingness to follow him into uncertainty. The town, meanwhile, waited. Every trip into town by Thomas became an event. People would stop their conversations mid-sentence when they saw him drive by. Some would whisper, don't do it," hoping somehow their words would reach him through the wind, the fields, or the fences that separated them. They didn't want to see their beloved rancher get hurt, and yet they couldn't look away. The suspense built like a storm cloud on the horizon, a feeling that something extraordinary or catastrophic was about to happen. Thomas felt the weight of those eyes and ears but did not let it deter him. He worked with precision, focusing on every detail. To him, it wasn't about defiance, it was about mastery. He wanted to prove, not to the town but to himself, that he could handle challenges others avoided. And deep down, he knew that once the work was done, the town's opinion, whether fearful or admiring, would not matter. But the tension was real. People whispered late into the evening, speculating about outcomes. Some imagined the worst, the cattle breaking loose, equipment damaged, and the town watching in horror. Others imagined a triumph, Thomas pulling off something no one else could, showing courage, skill, and determination that would be talked about for generations. By the end of the week, it was clear that the town had reached a breaking point. Everyone was watching, waiting, and wondering. The words don't do it hung in the air like a warning flag, a symbol of fear and hope intertwined. And yet, Thomas moved forward, calm, deliberate, and ready, his mind focused on the task ahead. For the first time in weeks, the sun rose over Cedar Creek with a sense of anticipation, unlike anything the town had felt before. The quiet, routine life of the town was about to be interrupted by one man's choice, a choice that would make the whole town hold its breath. And somewhere, deep in his heart, Thomas knew that once he started, there would be no turning back. It was the kind of morning that made people step outside early, cup their hands around their mouths, and call across fences. It was the kind of morning that made children peek from behind doors, and neighbors lean out of windows, hearts thumping with curiosity. And Thomas, oblivious to all the eyes watching him, took his first deliberate steps toward the northern pasture, toward the task that no one believed he could manage, yet he believed he could. Thomas Hayes had made his decision, and there was no turning back now. The town of Cedar Creek buzzed with nervous energy, though most people stayed behind fences, windows, and porches, unwilling to confront him directly. The northern pasture was a place of whispered warnings and old tales, but Thomas saw only possibility. For him, it was not recklessness, it was a challenge, a test of his skill and courage. The morning was crisp, with a soft layer of mist hovering over the fields. Thomas's truck rumbled along the dirt path leading to the forbidden section of land. Dust rose behind him like a ghostly trail, marking his solitary path. Every creak of the truck, every clink of the tools in the back, seemed louder than usual, amplified by the quiet and stillness of the town that followed his progress from afar. Even the birds seemed to pause as he drove by, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Once he arrived, Thomas stepped out and took a deep breath. The northern pasture stretched before him, vast and uneven, with patches of high grass hiding small gullies and rocks. The land had a reputation for accidents, and though Thomas knew many of the spots from years of careful observation, there were still hidden dangers. He surveyed the area, mapping out in his mind every step he would take, every maneuver he would attempt. This wasn't just about courage. It was about planning, precision, and respect for the land. He started by checking his equipment, ensuring that every fence post, gate, and tool was in perfect condition. The ranch hand, a young man named Jesse, arrived a little later, carrying extra ropes and feed. Jesse had followed Thomas's lead for years, trusting his knowledge and judgment, but even he couldn't hide the tension in his shoulders. "Are you sure about this, sir?" Jesse asked, his voice quiet, almost afraid to be overheard by the open fields. Thomas smiled calmly. "I've done my homework. I know this land, Jesse. We'll be careful, but we have to move forward. There's no other way." Jesse nodded, though his eyes lingered on the uneven terrain ahead, the cliffs and gullies that had terrified other ranchers in the past. He followed Thomas closely as they began to organize the herd, moving the cows gently but steadily toward the northern pasture. The animals seemed nervous, picking up on the tension around them, their hooves making soft, anxious sounds against the earth. Thomas's voice was calm, soothing, giving directions with authority and care. Meanwhile, the town watched. Word of Thomas's activity had spread like wildfire. People gathered in small clusters along the fences, leaning out of windows or sitting on porches with coffee cups in hand, hearts pounding with anticipation. Conversations were hushed but full of speculation. "I told you this was risky," Mrs. Clark said to her husband, her eyes glued to the distant pasture. "He shouldn't be doing this. Something's going to go wrong." Her husband shook his head, equally tense. "Maybe, but you have to admire him. Not many people have the guts to do what he's doing." Children, curious and adventurous, peeked around corners and climbed onto low fences for a better view. They whispered excitedly to each other, imagining either a spectacular disaster or a miraculous success. Even the teenagers, who usually spent their mornings on bicycles or with video games, paused to watch the unfolding drama. The entire town had become spectators, bound together by a mix of fear and fascination. Thomas and Jesse worked tirelessly, moving fences, arranging gates, and guiding the herd carefully. Every step was deliberate, every decision calculated. Thomas's experience showed in the way he handled the animals, his calm demeanor radiating a sense of control that kept even Jesse from panicking. But despite his confidence, there were moments when the land reminded him of its unpredictability. A hidden dip in the ground caused a cow to stumble, a loose fence post threatened to topple, and Thomas had to act quickly to prevent chaos. Each near miss increased the tension, both for the ranchers and for the townspeople watching. People gasped and muttered from their porches, some covering their mouths in fear, others leaning forward in awe. They felt every heartbeat, every decision, as if they were right there beside Thomas, moving through the treacherous pasture. By late afternoon, Thomas had made significant progress. The herd was mostly in the northern section now, grazing calmly under the watchful eyes of their caretakers. But the task wasn't over. Thomas knew that the most difficult part, the maneuver he had planned for weeks, was still ahead. It was bold, dangerous, and unlike anything the town had ever seen on their quiet, familiar land. As he prepared for the next step, more townspeople arrived, curious despite their fears. Some came in wagons, others on horseback, and a few even walked miles just to witness what was happening. The murmurs of don't do it spread from mouth to mouth, a chorus of concern and fascination. But Thomas ignored the whispers. He focused entirely on the task before him, his hands steady, his mind clear. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the pasture. The golden light made the land look both beautiful and treacherous, highlighting every bump, every gully, every hidden hazard. Thomas used this to his advantage, positioning the herd carefully, timing each movement so that the cattle remained calm and the risks minimized. But nature had its own plans. A sudden gust of wind swept across the field, startling some of the cows. Jesse shouted a warning, running to steady them, but Thomas remained composed. He knew that unpredictability was part of the land, part of the challenge, and part of what made this endeavor worth attempting. With a few firm commands and careful movements, he regained control, the herd settling back into place. Even the most skeptical townspeople couldn't help but feel admiration. They whispered to each other, some shaking their heads, others smiling. "He really knows what he's doing," one said. "I didn't think it was possible, but look at him." Despite this growing respect, tension lingered. Everyone knew that the next few hours would determine the outcome. Thomas's bold plan was still untested, and any mistake could lead to disaster. Yet, in the face of fear and doubt, he pressed on. He was a man who understood risk, who respected the land, and who trusted his own instincts above the warnings of others. As evening approached, Thomas paused to take stock. The northern pasture was quiet now, the herd settled and calm, the equipment in place, and the path for the final maneuver cleared. Jesse looked at him, admiration and nervousness mixed in his eyes. "Are you ready for this, sir?" he asked. Thomas nodded, a faint smile on his face. "I've been ready for a long time. Let's finish what we started." Back in the town, the anticipation was electric. People whispered about what might happen next, some placing secret bets on success or failure. Children imagined the spectacle, parents hoped for safety, and older residents felt a mixture of pride and fear. Every eye was on Thomas, every heart beating in sync with his careful, deliberate actions. The stage was set. The challenge had been prepared with precision, and the moment of truth was approaching. Thomas, calm and confident, knew that the next step would define not just his reputation, but the story the town would tell for generations. Whether it ended in triumph or disaster, there was no turning back. And as the last rays of sunlight faded, the northern pasture seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the daring act that would make Cedar Creek remember this day forever. The morning sun rose over Cedar Creek, painting the sky with streaks of gold and pink. The town seemed unusually quiet, as if the entire world knew that something big was about to happen. From their porches and windows, townspeople whispered among themselves, glancing toward the northern pasture. Children pressed their faces against fences, wide-eyed, while adults sipped coffee with fingers gripping cups a little too tightly. Even the wind seemed to pause, carrying the faint scent of hay and dust over the fields as if nature itself was holding its breath. Thomas Hayes was already at work. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man who had lived his life on this land and trusted every inch of it. The herd was mostly calm now, grazing in the northern pasture under his watchful eye. But today was the day he would attempt the most daring part of his plan, the move that would either prove his skill or shake the town to its core. He knew the risks, every hidden gully and uneven slope, every patch of soft earth that could cause trouble. Still, he pressed on, believing in his preparation and in the quiet determination that had carried him this far. Jesse, the young ranch hand, followed Thomas closely, carrying extra ropes and checking fences. His face was pale with worry, but he moved quickly, ready to act at a moment's notice. "Sir," Jesse said softly, "I don't know if the town is ready for this. I don't know if we are ready." Thomas looked at him calmly. "We're ready, Jesse. We've prepared for every possibility. The land, the herd, the equipment, it's all here. Now, we just have to act." The first task was to guide the herd through a narrow path leading to the steepest part of the pasture. This was where accidents had happened in the past. Hidden rocks, dips in the ground, and the uneven terrain had made the area dangerous, even for experienced ranchers. Thomas moved slowly, speaking to the cattle in low, steady tones. Each word, each gesture was meant to reassure them, to keep them calm. Jesse mirrored his movements, trying to keep the animals focused and steady. From the town, whispers and murmurs rose as the spectacle unfolded. "Look at him go," someone said, eyes wide with disbelief. "He's actually doing it." Others shook their heads, voices heavy with worry. "I told you it was dangerous. What if something goes wrong?" The town had become a living audience, hanging on every step, every careful movement of the rancher and his herd. People leaned forward as if they could help, yet they knew their presence was only for watching. Children clutched each other's hands, some holding their breath, hoping for a miracle. Thomas and Jesse continued, moving the herd with precision. The narrow path tested every ounce of Thomas's skill. One wrong step could spook the cattle, sending them tumbling down the slope. He paused at every turn, ensuring that the footing was solid, that the ropes were secure, that the cows were calm. The tension was almost unbearable, every movement carrying the weight of potential disaster. Then it happened, a sudden stumble. One of the cows tripped over a hidden rock, its hooves skidding dangerously close to a gully. Jesse shouted and rushed to steady it, while Thomas moved quickly, using his strength and experience to guide the animal back to safety. The crowd in the town gasped, some covering their mouths in fear, others frozen with awe at the rancher's quick reaction. For a moment, the past of the northern pasture seemed to come alive. The old stories of accidents and chaos resurfaced. But Thomas remained calm, his focus unbroken. He reassured the herd with soft murmurs, guiding them gently back onto the safer path. The near incident reminded everyone of the stakes, making the air heavy with suspense. As the herd reached a more open area, Thomas prepared for the next stage, the maneuver that would amaze or terrify the town. He needed to guide the cattle over a small incline and through a narrow opening between two fences, a task that required precision, timing, and nerves of steel. Jesse followed, careful not to step on uneven ground, his eyes darting between Thomas and the animals. The townspeople could see everything from a distance. Mothers held their children close, men leaned on fences, and even the older residents who had seen many things in their long lives whispered in disbelief. "I can't believe he's doing this," someone murmured. "It's impossible." Thomas took a deep breath, assessing the land, the herd, and the path ahead. The incline was steep and the cows were nervous, but he had a plan. He used a series of calm, deliberate movements to encourage the lead animals to move forward, knowing that the rest would follow. His voice, low and steady, carried across the field, guiding the herd like a conductor leading an orchestra. The moment was tense. Each step the cows took could lead to success or chaos. Thomas moved alongside them, adjusting fences, ensuring there were no hazards, his eyes scanning every detail. Jesse assisted, holding ropes and moving obstacles out of the way. The herd began to respond, following Thomas's guidance with surprising ease. For a few minutes, the impossible seemed possible, but the land had one more surprise in store. A loose patch of earth near the incline gave way under the weight of a cow. The animal stumbled slightly, and the herd tensed, sensing danger. Heartbeats quickened, both on the field and in the town watching from afar. Thomas reacted instantly, positioning himself between the animal and the hazard, using his experience to stabilize the situation. Jesse moved quickly to help, his hands steady despite the fear that coursed through him. The crowd gasped again, voices trembling with excitement and fear. Some whispered prayers, others cheered quietly, while a few shook their heads in disbelief. Everyone could feel the tension in their bones, as if they were part of the event themselves. Thomas never faltered. With steady hands and calm words, he guided the animal to safer ground, the rest of the herd following cautiously. A collective sigh of relief seemed to ripple through the town, though everyone knew the challenge wasn't over yet. As the day progressed, Thomas continued with the final steps of his plan. The herd had to move through a narrow path that led to a section of the pasture bordered by cliffs on one side and a shallow ravine on the other. It was a place that had always terrified local ranchers. Thomas, however, saw it as the final test of skill and courage. Jesse worked beside him, moving fences, holding ropes, and occasionally helping a nervous cow stay on course. Every movement was precise, every command calculated. Thomas's focus was unwavering, his experience guiding him through the risks that had once scared others away. Meanwhile, the town continued to watch, drawn like moths to a flame. Children whispered excitedly, pointing at Thomas and the herd. Adults held their breath, some silently rooting for success, others fearing disaster. The town was alive with anticipation, every heart pounding in sync with the drama unfolding on the northern pasture. Finally, after hours of careful maneuvering, Thomas reached the most critical part of his plan. He had to guide the herd through a tight opening between two fences and across a steep slope, the moment that would decide everything. He paused, surveying the land, the animals, and the path ahead. Jesse looked at him, eyes wide with nervous admiration. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. Thomas nodded. "We've done everything we can. Now it's time to see if it works." With that, he began the final maneuver. The cows moved cautiously at first, following his lead. Every step was deliberate, measured, and careful. The slope was steep, the path narrow, but Thomas's calm, steady guidance kept the herd focused. Jesse assisted, holding ropes and ensuring that no animal strayed into danger. The townspeople watched, hearts in their throats. They could see every step, every careful movement, and felt the suspense as if they were part of the action. Some whispered, "He's going to do it." Others murmured, "I hope nothing goes wrong." The mixture of fear and admiration was palpable, creating an atmosphere charged with emotion. Step by step, the herd moved forward. The most dangerous part was just ahead. Thomas's hands were steady, his voice calm, guiding the cattle through the narrowest part of the path. The land tested him at every turn, but he remained focused, his experience and preparation carrying him forward. Finally, the herd reached the other side safely. A cheer erupted from the townspeople, some clapping quietly, others shouting in excitement. Thomas stood for a moment, surveying the herd and the land, a faint smile on his face. Jesse exhaled in relief, knowing they had completed the most dangerous part of their plan. For the first time that day, the northern pasture seemed calm. The herd grazed peacefully, and Thomas's careful planning had paid off. The town, still watching from a distance, began to murmur in amazement. "He actually did it," someone whispered. "I can't believe it." Thomas looked around, calm but aware of the tension that still lingered. The challenge wasn't over entirely, but the hardest part had been achieved. The town would never forget this moment. The day Thomas Hayes, the rancher who dared to defy warnings, guided his herd through the most dangerous part of the northern pasture. By mid-afternoon, the northern pasture seemed peaceful, almost serene. The herd grazed calmly, and the town, which had been holding its collective breath, watched in awe and disbelief. Many thought Thomas Hayes had performed the impossible. But just as the townspeople were beginning to relax, the land reminded everyone that nature, and daring decisions, could never be entirely controlled. It started subtly at first. A gust of wind swept across the pasture, rustling the tall grass and causing a few cows to shift nervously. The small incline that Thomas had so carefully navigated earlier seemed less stable now, as if the earth itself were reacting to the weight of the herd. Jesse noticed it first and called out to Thomas, a hint of alarm in his voice. "Sir, the ground, it's giving way near the south edge." Thomas didn't panic. He had anticipated possible trouble and had positioned the herd in a way that minimized risk. But as he approached the area, he realized the slope had weakened more than he expected. One of the cows near the edge slipped slightly, hooves sliding in loose soil. Jesse rushed forward to steady it, but the sudden movement startled the rest of the herd. Panic rippled through the animals like electricity, sudden and unpredictable. The townspeople, watching from a safe distance, gasped. Mothers clutched their children, men leaned forward anxiously on fences, and the elderly whispered prayers under their breath. The peaceful scene had erupted into chaos in an instant. Thomas acted immediately. His calm voice carried across the field, guiding the cows with precise commands and gestures. He moved closer to the panicked animal, steadying it and signaling to Jesse to assist. The two worked in perfect harmony, their movements careful, deliberate, and decisive. Even the most skeptical onlookers could see the skill and experience that Thomas brought to the task. But the herd's panic was contagious. A few animals bolted toward the narrow opening between the fences, where the slope was steepest. Jesse and Thomas worked tirelessly, positioning themselves to intercept the cows before disaster struck. The noise of hooves, the shouted warnings, and the frantic calls of the townspeople combined to create a scene that was both chaotic and mesmerizing. From the town, the reaction was immediate. People rushed along the fences, shouting encouragement or advice, though they were too far to make a real difference. Some tried to move closer, but others held them back, urging caution. "Stay back, don't get too close," someone called. Hearts pounded across Cedar Creek as the drama unfolded. Thomas didn't flinch. He had faced dangerous situations before, but this was unlike anything he had experienced. The herd's sudden panic required split-second decisions, and he made each one with skill born of years working on unpredictable land. A cow teetered on the edge of a gully, hooves slipping dangerously. Thomas grabbed the rope, pulling it gently but firmly, his strength steadying the animal. Jesse followed his lead, moving quickly to secure the surrounding cows and prevent further chaos. Time seemed to stretch. The panic, the noise, and the movement created an almost cinematic tension. The townspeople could see the danger, but also the mastery with which Thomas handled it. Some whispered in awe, "He's saving them, he's actually saving them." Others shook their heads, fear and disbelief etched into their faces. Children clutched each other, imagining the worst, while the adults silently prayed for the herd and for Thomas. The herd slowly began to calm under the rancher's guidance, though the tension in the air remained thick. Thomas positioned himself strategically, ensuring that no cow wandered too close to the unstable edge. He spoke in low, soothing tones, his voice cutting through the chaos, helping the animals regain their composure. Jesse mirrored his movements, ready to act at a moment's notice. Just when it seemed the immediate danger had passed, another challenge appeared. One of the gates, which Thomas had previously secured, began to tilt under the pressure of the moving animals. A few cows pressed against it, anxious and startled, causing it to wobble dangerously. Thomas sprinted toward it, Jesse close behind, and together they stabilized the gate just in time. The herd shifted once more, the tension rippling through the field like a wave. The townspeople watched with bated breath. Some held their hands over their mouths, unable to look away. Others leaned forward, heartbeats sinking with the pulse of the field. The chaos had become a spectacle, a living drama of man, animal, and land. Every eye in Cedar Creek was on Thomas, every heart racing with the unpredictability of the moment. Thomas didn't allow panic to creep in. He guided the herd toward a safer section of the pasture, using careful movements, ropes, and his voice. Jesse assisted tirelessly, helping the cows navigate the uneven terrain. Slowly, the herd began to calm, moving as one under their careful guidance. It was a moment of control amid the chaos, a demonstration of experience, patience, and courage. But the town's reaction wasn't just fear. There was awe, admiration, and a growing respect for the rancher who had taken such a risk and now faced the consequences with skill and determination. People whispered to each other, voices mixed with relief and amazement. "He's incredible," one man said. "I've never seen anyone handle animals like that." Meanwhile, Thomas kept moving, ensuring that the herd remained safe and that no further accidents occurred. He checked each cow carefully, making sure none were injured, and adjusted fences to prevent future slips. Every movement was deliberate, every decision thoughtful. Even in the midst of chaos, he remained calm, steady, and in control. Jesse, exhausted but relieved, looked at Thomas with admiration. "I don't know how you do it," he said, panting slightly. "I thought we'd lose some of them." Thomas shook his head, a faint smile on his face. "It's about preparation and focus. The land tests us, but we adapt. That's all there is to it." As the afternoon wore on, the herd settled into the safer areas of the pasture. The gates held, the animals grazed quietly, and the immediate danger passed. The townspeople began to relax slightly, though many still watched intently, unable to resist seeing the final outcome of Thomas's daring endeavor. The story of the chaos spread quickly. People who had been on porches, in windows, and along fences recounted every moment to friends and neighbors who had missed it. The event became the talk of the town, a mix of fear, excitement, and admiration. Children retold the story with wide eyes, embellishing the drama, while adults debated the skill and bravery of Thomas Hayes. By evening, the northern pasture was calm again. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the land and bathing everything in a golden glow. Thomas walked among the herd, checking each animal, his body tired but his mind alert. Jesse followed, equally exhausted but proud. They had faced danger, chaos, and unpredictability, and emerged with the herd intact, a testament to skill, preparation, and courage. Back in Cedar Creek, people continued to talk. Some praised Thomas's bravery, others shook their heads at the risk he had taken. The events of the day had become part of local legend before the sun even set. Children went to bed dreaming of the dramatic scenes they had witnessed. Parents whispered about the audacity of the rancher, and elders nodded knowingly, remembering that true courage often walked hand in hand with risk. Thomas himself reflected quietly as he watched the herd settle for the evening. The chaos had been intense, the stakes high, but every challenge had been met with careful thought and decisive action. He understood that this day would be remembered not just for the danger, but for the way he had handled it, calmly, skillfully, and with respect for the land and animals. And so, as the night settled over Cedar Creek, the town buzzed with stories, the herd rested in safety, and Thomas Hayes quietly acknowledged the reality of what he had done. Chaos had come, but control had been regained. The consequences, though not over, had been managed, and the town would remember this day as a mixture of fear, excitement, and admiration. The northern pasture, once a place of warnings and danger, had become the stage for a story that would be told for years. The herd was safe, the land respected, and the legend of Thomas Hayes's daring act had only just begun. The next morning, Cedar Creek awoke to a new kind of quiet. The sun rose over the northern pasture, casting warm light on the fields that had witnessed both chaos and courage the day before. Birds sang as usual, and the faint scent of earth and hay floated in the cool morning air, but the town felt different. Something had shifted. People whispered as they stepped out of their homes, and the story of Thomas Hayes's daring act was already spreading like wildfire. Thomas was already in the pasture, inspecting the herd and checking the fences once more. His body was tired from the long day before, but his mind was alert and focused. He moved slowly, carefully observing each cow, making sure none were hurt, and confirming that the land had not been damaged by the panic of the previous afternoon. Jesse followed closely, carrying ropes and tools, equally exhausted but proud. Together, they had faced chaos and come through with skill and courage. Word traveled quickly through town. By mid-morning, people had gathered near the fences, curious to see the outcome of Thomas's bold move. Some were eager to congratulate him, others still wary, fearing the possibility of lingering consequences. Children pressed against the rails, whispering excitedly, while adults discussed the events in hushed, awed tones. Everyone wanted to see the herd, to witness the proof that Thomas had truly managed the impossible. Thomas's wife, Margaret, arrived soon after carrying a small basket of food. She approached him cautiously, worry evident in her eyes. "Thomas," she said softly, "are they all safe? Did everything go well?" Thomas turned to her, a faint smile on his face. "They're all safe, Margaret. No injuries and the pasture is intact. It was tense, yes, but we handled it. Everything's fine." Margaret exhaled in relief, her hands loosening from the grip on the basket. She looked out at the herd grazing peacefully, and for the first time in days she allowed herself to feel calm. "I can't believe it," she whispered. "You did it. You really did it." From the town, people began to approach slowly, some congratulating Thomas, others still trying to hide their lingering fear. "That was unbelievable," said George Miller, the neighbor who had warned Thomas against the northern pasture. "I didn't think it was possible, but you managed it. I can't deny it." Thomas nodded humbly. "It wasn't just me," he said. "Jesse helped every step of the way, and the land, well, it guided us too. We respected it, and it rewarded us in the end." The crowd murmured, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others smiling with admiration. The town's initial fear had transformed into awe. Thomas's actions had reminded everyone that courage, preparation, and skill could achieve what seemed impossible. People began sharing their observations, describing the moments of tension, the near disasters, and the calm expertise with which Thomas and Jesse had handled the herd. Each story grew, becoming a mixture of reality and legend, the kind of tale that Cedar Creek would tell for generations. As the day went on, Thomas and Jesse continued their work, repairing any minor damage, reinforcing fences, and ensuring that the herd was settled for the next few days. Their movements were steady and deliberate, a reflection of the careful planning and skill that had carried them through the previous day's chaos. The land, once feared, now seemed to acknowledge their respect and courage, calm and still under the morning sun. Children ran through the fields, careful to stay a safe distance from the herd, their laughter mingling with the soft sounds of grazing cattle. Parents watched with a mixture of relief and admiration, proud of Thomas's accomplishment but still aware of the risks involved. Even the older residents, who had seen many events unfold in their lives, nodded in respect. They had witnessed a rare combination of courage, skill, and determination, and they knew it would be remembered long after that day. Thomas took a moment to stand on a small rise in the northern pasture, looking out over the fields. The herd grazed peacefully, the fences held strong, and the land was intact. A sense of satisfaction washed over him, quiet but deep. He had faced risk, chaos, and unpredictability, and he had emerged successfully. More than that, he had proven something to himself, that preparation, focus, and respect for both the land and the animals could overcome even the most daunting challenges. Jesse approached, carrying a small water bottle. "You've set a record today, sir," he said, handing it to Thomas. "I've never seen anyone handle a situation like that." Thomas smiled faintly, accepting the water. "It wasn't about setting records, Jesse. It was about respect. Respect for the land, the herd, and the work we do every day. That's what makes the difference." By afternoon, the townspeople began to leave, their hearts lighter and their conversations filled with admiration. News of Thomas's daring feat spread quickly through Cedar Creek, each retelling emphasizing the skill, bravery, and composure he had displayed. People would later exaggerate details, embellishing the story, but the truth, his calm leadership during chaos, remained at the center. Even those who had doubted him could not hide their respect. "I may not agree with taking such a risk," said one man to his neighbor, "but you can't deny his skill. He handled it perfectly. I wouldn't have been able to do what he did." The evening came, and the sky filled with warm shades of orange and pink. Thomas stood once more overlooking the pasture, watching the herd settle for the night. Margaret joined him, slipping her hand into his. "Do you think the town will ever forget this day?" she asked softly. Thomas chuckled. "I doubt it. Stories like this have a way of growing. And maybe that's good. It reminds people that courage isn't always easy, but it's worth it when it's done with respect and care." The herd was quiet now, each cow resting peacefully, the grass gently swaying in the evening breeze. Thomas felt a sense of completion, a quiet pride that came from facing danger and emerging successful. The northern pasture, once a place of fear and caution, had become a testament to his skill, determination, and patience. As night fell over Cedar Creek, the town settled into an unusual calm. Families gathered in their homes, recounting the events, telling children about Thomas Hayes, the rancher who had dared what no one else would. Conversations were filled with awe, excitement, and admiration, mixed with the understanding that some risks, when approached with care, could lead to extraordinary results. In the following days, the story of Thomas's daring feat became part of the town's collective memory. People would speak of the herd's panic, the chaotic moments, and the calm, decisive actions that prevented disaster. Children would retell the story with wide eyes, exaggerating details, while adults remembered the courage and skill that had made the event possible. It became a legend, not just about risk, but about mastery, preparation, and respect. Thomas and Jesse continued their work on the ranch, reinforcing fences, tending to the herd, and restoring the land where needed. But the northern pasture now carried a new meaning. It was a symbol of what could be achieved with knowledge, courage, and patience. Thomas often walked through it quietly, reflecting on the events of the past days. He thought about the townspeople, their fear and admiration, and the lessons they would take from his actions. One afternoon, Margaret joined him in the pasture. They stood together, watching the sun dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows over the grazing herd. "You changed something here," she said softly. "Not just the land, but how people see you, how they see courage." Thomas nodded. "Perhaps, but more importantly, I've changed how I see it too. Courage isn't just about daring. It's about preparation, respect, and keeping calm when chaos comes. That's what matters." The townspeople continued to watch from a distance, visiting the pasture occasionally, curious to see the herd and the land that had witnessed such a remarkable event. Their fear had turned into respect, their whispers into admiration. Thomas had done something no one expected, and while some might still question his decision, most understood the skill, patience, and bravery it had required. Over time, Cedar Creek would tell this story countless times, how Thomas Hayes had faced risk, navigated chaos, and emerged successful. It became more than just a tale of a rancher and his herd. It became a story about courage, careful preparation, and the rewards of respecting both the land and the work one does every day. And Thomas. He continued his life quietly, tending to the herd, walking the pastures, and watching over the land he loved. He didn't boast or seek recognition. The satisfaction of knowing he had faced challenge and succeeded was enough. But he also knew that Cedar Creek would never forget the day when one man's bold decision captured the attention, fear, and admiration of the entire town. That northern pasture, once a place of warnings and whispered fears, had become a place of legend. And in the hearts and minds of Cedar Creek, the story of Thomas Hayes would live on, a story of courage, wisdom, and the remarkable power of a determined heart.